And surprisingly, I found a perfect way to begin my advocacy for the disabled. Unfortunately, it didn't necessarily, well, in a weird way, it kind of began how, I don't know how to put it, but the thing I gotta say is, and forgive the strong language, this is probably going to be your first controversial point anyway, but I gotta say that someone, first of all, said, sorry, it really upsets me. It makes me mad. So I was telling this guy, let's see. So I'm not going to get into specifics about him, but he told me that he had a disability and whatever, and that if I was in the country that he's in right now, it'd be different. And someone else told me on Twitter, well, I became disabled, da 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 da. Well, you know what? First of all, being born disabled is way different than becoming disabled. If you become disabled, there are some people who are going to say, oh, holy shit, we're going to stay away from you, and, like, you're a pariah now and stuff. But when you're born disabled, when you're born on the low rung of the social ladder, you don't have much further to fall. And people are going to want to kick you lower and lower anyway. When you become disabled, you do have people who are either going to climb down to the lower rungs for you to catch you, or they're going to be there to catch you anyway. So, people don't understand that becoming disabled and being born disabled are way, well, even, let me put it this way, becoming disabled as an adult is way different than becoming disabled as a child or being born disabled. And also, this guy already got kind of mad at me. He says he doesn't like to see disabled and sick people go to these faith healers and get lied to. He has accepted his disability and serves God. Okay, maybe he's not mad at me, but I don't know what he's thinking behind his computer. But when I told him that being born disabled is different than becoming disabled, that's when he brought up the preacher guy to me, Justin Peters. He's like, well, have you heard of Justin Peters? I had to roll my eye and go, oh, thank you for mitigating my experience there, buddy, and thank you for, but by the way, like I said, forgive my strong language, and this is going to be the first controversial point, but in a lot of ways, I find this guy's testimony to be complete, forgive my language, bullshit, because it's like, okay, you don't even really talk about your disability in your testimony, and it's a thing that society points out to us all the time. So how are you going to even want to even share the gospel with disabled people? How are you going to even affect disabled people to want to hear the gospel if you're not going to talk about what has been something major for you in terms of your life and how you serve God? Seriously, this is the only part that this guy talks about in terms of his disability. He says, he doesn't mention how he got it, first of all. He doesn't mention what other experiences he went through in terms of it. He just talks about his whole faith issue, And it's like, really, seriously, this is the only part he mentions about. This is what he says. He says, I'm trying to find it here. He said, okay, first of all, he doesn't even talk about his disability in the first part of his testimony. He doesn't even talk about it in the first paragraph. You don't even know it till he has it when he says, fast forwarding, at age 16, I went to see Nora Lamb and R.W. Schambach in hopes of being healed of my cerebral palsy. That's the first time we ever hear about it. This is what began my interest in the Word Faith movement. This should have been a warning sign in and of itself for a couple reasons. One, the very fact that I went to see faith healers showed a real lack of spiritual discernment and maturity at best. One cannot be spiritually mature and lack discernment at the same time. Spiritual and biblical discernment and maturity go hand in hand. They are two sides of the same coin. And anyway, so he doesn't even talk about how he got cerebral palsy, or if he was born with cerebral palsy, or any of that. Okay, that's probably why I never even heard of this guy. Unlike Nick Vujicic, this guy is not upfront with you about his disability. He just says, fast forwarding at age 16, I went to see whoever those faith healers are, in hopes of being healed of my cerebral palsy. Oh, thank you. Now you mention you have cerebral palsy as a side note. As if you didn't go through all this crap that other disabled people go through, and you really want to attract people to the gospel. And I love this amount of chutzpah. He says, however, in hindsight, I now see that my grieving was misplaced, because he's talking about the world faith movement. He says, I grieve primarily because I sold to porn, the desperate and the sick, being abused and exploited. My heart broke when I saw hundreds and hundreds of people at these meetings who were far more sick, far more desperate, far more crippled than I'd ever thought of being. I knew that these people were being exploited. And, yeah, it's also ironic that you use the word crippled. Real nice. And it just, so, I mean, no wonder I haven't heard of this guy. And here's the ironic part. You think I would have heard of this guy, since he could tickle people's ears too, it seems like. Just so many ways. He's like almost a converse of the faith healers in some ways. Like, he totally minimizes that people have experienced a lot of issues because of their disabilities. He just kind of puts it in, oh yeah, I had this thing, and it's kind of a side note, and unfortunately, you know what, it's not a side note for a lot of people. It's unfortunately what defines us. And unfortunately, as I said, I don't want it to define us, but he's already acting like, oh hey, everybody else is at that place, and so what, we have our disabilities. Ta-da! Boom. Either he's an exception to the rule, which I should have thought about too, or he's still not living in reality. He's still not mature. He's still not whatever he needs to be. And like I said, he doesn't even talk about his experiences with cerebral palsy. It's kind of like, oh, it's a side note that never really affected crap in my life. Oh yeah? How come you went to see faith healers, buddy? There's a lot more to the story that you're not telling. There's a lot more. And he also says something about being bitter about his disability. He says, and either he's a saint, or he's lying, or he's in denial. He said, let's see, I also tried to alleviate my doubts by getting something that has been a mainstay in my life very confused. I can honestly say that I've never really been bitter about my handicap. Though there have been difficult times, to be sure, truth be known, it's probably been harder on my family than on me. I've never been bitter about it. I have always been handicapped. I've never known anything different. Being crippled is normal for me. For almost all my life, I have confused this lack of bitterness for God's sufficient grace. Again, guy's either lying, he's in denial, or he's a saint. And he says, I've always been handicapped. Fine, some people say I've always been saved. Well, maybe they were saved when they were, for example, like 5 years old, but they can't remember their exact testimony, or whatever. But he never talks about, like, how he got cerebral palsy. Was he born prematurely? Was he in an accident when he was 2 years old? And he talks about, it's been harder on my family than on me. What does that mean? What does that mean? And can people relate? So if you're not even willing to relate to people, are they going to want to hear your message? Are they going to say, and excuse my language again, are they going to want to say, you know what, screw you, we don't even want to hear what you have to say, because you don't even want to relate. Okay? You just don't even want to relate. You don't even want to stay on topic. So, like I said, it's almost ironic that I haven't heard of this guy, because he's almost a flip side of the coin of the faith healer types. It's amazing. He's like the side that says, oh, screw all the problems we have in the world, screw all this, just treat them as side notes. When, hey, the reality is that they aren't treated as side notes. They aren't treated as just a part of life. They're treated as what make us pariahs. So, and then like when people say, well, I became disabled. Again, let me go back to that too, because that's another thing. When people say, I became disabled, again, it is a heck of a lot different than being born disabled. Always being on the low rung of the social ladder. Always always having people to want to kick you down. Whereas if you become disabled and you fall a couple of rungs, usually there will be people to catch you. And there will usually be people who say, oh, your boss fired you, your wife left you, your whoever it is. Well, you know what? They're jerks. Well, when you're on the lower rung, when you were born that way, people say, even you can see it in the Bible, people are like, what did your parents do? Holy crap, what did you do to be born this way? Holy crap, what happened in your family? So someone always gets blamed when you're born disabled. Maybe you even get blamed in some perverse sense. And, if you read the articles about how even these kids, they're abandoned. I was just talking about recently that article on Yahoo News where they talk about how babies in China are abandoned when they're born disabled. A lot of people who become disabled, not all, but a lot of people who become disabled aren't abandoned like that. People who are born disabled, we are abandoned. You know what? We're screwed. We're basically treated like, you're finished, you're done, you're never going anywhere. If you're born this way, it's going to be the rest of your life. So you know what? Screw you. And that's what people who become disabled don't get half the time. That they had a life once, and there will be people who will stay with them from that life and want to catch them. But if we're already, like I said, if we're already on the low rung, they're going to want to kick us lower. As if we can even really get lower. So, I think that's the first place I'm going to start. Trying to get people like Justin Peters and people who have become disabled, getting them to understand that, for lack of a better term, they need to get a life. And they need to understand that they already had a life. That they can recover in a lot of ways that people who are born disabled never had. And obviously we can never recover because we didn't have it in the first place. And don't try to minimize what we've been through by saying, oh, well, have you heard of this person? Have you heard of this person? Have you heard of this person? Especially when they're not willing to treat what they've gone through as something significant.